Game of Thrones ended exactly as it should. So, don't get me wrong, there were several problems with the last season of Game of Thrones. I'm not saying it was perfect. So, in order to quench your desire to whine about everything, I mean, seriously, I don't know why people love to whine about everything, but it's clear to me that people do. I mean, I went on Facebook, I went on YouTube, and all I heard was people whining and whining about how bad the last season was. And so, this led me to the conclusion that people just like to whine. I think the last season was great. I'm not saying that it was perfect. There were several problems, and I'm going to point out what I thought was bad. But at the same time, I don't think that there were that many problems with the storyline. In my opinion, it really comes down to two problems. I'm going to start with the negative because I think that most people probably don't see it as such a good season. So I'm going to start with the negative in hopes that we can reach some common ground somewhere. And then I'm going to move on to why I think the last season was great and why my admiration towards Game of Thrones is actually way higher today than it was before. So what were the two problems in the last season of Game of Thrones? The first problem I believe we can all agree on, which is that it was just too short. I kind of felt like they just sped up the whole storyline. In fact, I also felt that in the last season. I felt like they've been doing this for quite some time now. And this is one of the biggest problems with Game of Thrones in its last few seasons. If you look at the first 4 seasons, one of the reasons why people loved it so much is because it really was a very complex and rich storyline. It took some time to understand. In fact, I watched the whole Game of Thrones twice. I thought that I knew what was going on in the show the first time I watched it. But when I watched it for the second time, there were so many new details that I noticed that I didn't notice before. And that's because it has a genuinely rich and genuinely complex storyline. But of course, what we saw over the last few seasons was it was almost like the script writing equivalent of Zip or WinZip. And that, of course, is not the quality to which we became accustomed to, which is why a lot of people had a problem with it. And of course, you're absolutely right to be outraged about this. This is, by the way, a perfectly good reason why we should all be reading the books, because I don't think that the TV show does justice to this story. So I think that people who are really interested in Game of Thrones should just go ahead and read the books. So that's the first problem that existed in the last season. The second problem, of course, which might derive from the first problem, is what they did to Daenerys Targaryen, the Mother of Dragons. I think that the outrage about the 5th episode of the season was absolutely justified. You can't just build a character for 7 whole seasons and then just overnight destroy everything that you built. Now, please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that a character can't change. Of course it can. In fact, the best stories ever involve some type of change in some of the characters. So much so that it's really hard to think of a story, a good story, that doesn't involve at least some change in character. But the change has to be gradual. You can't just flip a character overnight. And a lot of people are complaining about this in the context of, oh well, now she's a bad queen. As if a negative change in the character is always a bad thing. Of course it isn't. I can give you several examples to characters who changed for the worse, and nonetheless the storyline was not damaged in any way. I think the best example that comes to mind is Walter White from Breaking Bad. Throughout the entire show, Walter is trying to convince us and his family in a million different ways that he's basically doing what he is doing for his family. But of course, by the time the last season comes up, it's well beyond clear that that's not the case. It's well beyond clear that he is doing it because he loves doing it. And the awesome part comes in the last season when he just admits it. He admits it to his wife, Skylar. He just explicitly says, I did it for me. I enjoyed it. I was good at it. And the reason why nobody was upset about this is because, the change was gradual. It didn't happen over an episode or over 2 episodes. It didn't happen even over a season of the show. It was gradual. It was a gradual, slow but sure change, taking one step at a time towards oblivion. So the fact that the change was for the worse doesn't unto itself ruin the show. It's not the direction of the change, it's the pace. They just change her character overnight. But of course, that's pretty much it when it comes to complaining about the show. As I said at the get-go of this video, if you came here to hear someone whine about how bad the show is, you came to the wrong place. So for the rest of the video, I'm going to try to pull up from my memory all the things that I loved about the last season of the Game of Thrones, and especially about the last episode, which I think was really genuinely good. The first thing that comes to mind is the moral issue. You see, I was very concerned, just like many people, or at least I hope, much like many people, about the possibility that the end is going to really have no point, no moral point. Now, you can be as cynical about this as you wish to be, but I really was hoping for an ending for the show that would convey some positive moral value, some message of some positive nature to the world. Bear in mind, this is probably, I'm not sure, but I think the most watched TV show in human history. So conveying at least some positive message was, in my eyes at least, to a certain degree important. And I think that there are several very positive messages conveyed, especially in the last episode of the Game of Thrones. These are not just positive messages, these are overwhelmingly positive messages, which are, in my eyes, very important. The most important message, which is also the first one that comes to mind, is what Tyrion tells Jon Snow when he's trying to convince Jon to kill Dany. Tyrion explains that in Dany's mind, she's making the world a better place. And this is lost on a lot of people because we tend to demonize the tyrants of the past to such a ridiculous degree and scale. It's almost as if we think that they did what they did knowing full well that it's going to cause the damage that it will cause. But of course, we forget that these people, as much as we disagree with them, in their minds, were trying to make the world a better place. And this is of course true for the worst tyrants of the 20th century, but it's also true for pretty much any tyrant. I mean, sure, you can probably go far back and kind of like before the 20th century, and maybe even some tyrants in the 20th century. You can find tyrants that are just there for the corruption and the money and all that. But the worst tyrants in human history, those who slaughtered gazillions of people, in their minds were trying to build a better world, which is why this moral conclusion is so important. Tyrion explains to Jon that Dany sees herself as the savior of the human race, and that therefore anyone who stands in her way is going to get killed, because in her mind she's building some type of a utopia. And the message that is obviously conveyed here is that, first thing first, we don't actually believe that it's going to be a utopia. Let's start here. I mean, if Tyrion believed that this is going to be a utopia of some sort, he wouldn't have he wouldn't have tried to convince Jon Snow to kill Dany, but of course he does. And he does because he wholeheartedly believes that it's not going to be a utopia. And he's right, there's no reason to believe that life will ever be a utopia. But he explains that Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, really thinks that she's going to build this. That she's actually going to build some type of a utopia. And then he asks Jon Snow, if you thought that you are going to create heaven, wouldn't you kill anyone standing in your way between you and that heaven?
She believes her destiny is to build a better world for everyone. If you believed that, if you truly believed it, wouldn't you kill whoever stood between you and paradise?
And really, that is the mindset of virtually every mass murdering psycho in history. That's how psychos of that nature think. Now, you don't have to agree with what in their heads amounts to a utopia, but in their heads, that's exactly what it is. And that is such a powerful and overwhelmingly important message. I feel like that message is lost on some people because I feel like the whole issue of tyrants, especially in the 20th century, especially 20th century tyrants, is there's a certain amount of overuse in terms of the warnings that humanity needs to get from the 20th century. But although a lot of people have a tendency to be a bit cynical about these warnings and about these conclusions that derive from 20th century tyrants, I think that these lessons are actually really genuinely important. And if that's not enough, I think that a lot of people are beginning to forget these lessons of the 20th century, which is why it was really nice for me to all of a sudden see these lessons kind of pop up in what is my favorite show of all time, and possibly the best show of all time, or at least one of the best shows. And it just popped there, and it was really nice to see it. Another moral message that is conveyed with some sense of humor, by the way, at the end of the show is the concept of the rejection of hereditary rule. They're basically constructing a republic at the end of the series. Did you get that? I mean, at the end of the show, they basically declared the now 6 kingdoms a republic. I mean, the whole point of a republic is the rejection of hereditary rule, embracing the concept of, the best person should just be the ruler. And that's what they're doing. They're basically constructing a republic at the end of the show. And they're also kind of joking about democracy. I think that this was their way to explain to the viewers, just the gap between the morality of today's world and the morality of the TV show. There's this moment where Sam says, why won't we allow everyone to decide who gets to rule? Why not let everyone get a vote? It's basically promoting democracy. And then the other lords are, making ludicrous suggestions. Yeah, I'm gonna let my horse vote as well. And, just completely laughing at the very idea of democracy. That was just the way of the show creators to tell us, look, we couldn't take it that far because it will be ridiculous, because there's a huge jump in morality, so we can't jump that far in a TV show, certainly not in one episode, so forget about it. That was their way of saying that. But of course, they can jump, and they did jump towards a republic. They basically said, enough with hereditary rule. From here on in, we're going to select the best one to rule us. And that is, with all the cynicism that comes up with these type of moral values promoted in TV shows and movies, I think was a very good thing. They basically rejected the concept of hereditary rule, which, despite the fact that in the West and in the free world doesn't exist anymore, believe it or not, actually there are plenty of places around the world where that type of There are plenty of places around the world where that type of form of government, namely hereditary rule, still exists. So yeah, it was a pretty cool moral value. The last but not least positive moral value that they conveyed is the fact that both of the most powerful people who ended up controlling, well, the six kingdoms, were people who didn't really want to rule. So Bran doesn't want to rule, and it's very clear. But neither does Tyrion, and that's a really good message. They're basically sending the message of, look, these people, they don't want to be in power. They're doing this as a burden, as kind of like their way of contributing to humanity, because they understand the responsibility on their shoulders, and that's why they want to be there. They don't want to be there, but they have to, because they're the best ones who qualify. And one of the main reasons why they are the best ones who qualify is precisely because they're not power hungry. They're not after power and control. So they end up ruling the six kingdoms despite the fact that they don't want to. They reluctantly rule the six kingdoms. And I think that is a very powerful message, and a very positive one at that. A lot of people say that the show kind of attacks women, I guess, because the main powerful women of the show ended up dying or becoming terrible monsters in the case of Daenerys Targaryen. And I even heard some feminists being angry about this. I respectfully disagree. I think that Sansa Stark is a very powerful figure, a very powerful female figure, and she ends up being the queen of the North, which also kind of sounds nice, doesn't it? So I don't think that the show in any way, shape, or form belittles women, which is another good thing. Last but not least, I also loved pretty much the way that they ended the story of the characters, especially in the Stark family. For example, Arya. Arya goes, west of Westeros. And that's exactly what you would expect her character to do. I mean, if they destroyed the character of Daenerys Targaryen, the breaker of chains, then, at least they didn't destroy any other characters. Or at least they didn't destroy Arya Stark. Arya Stark ends up going west of Westeros. I heard a really good joke about this. Someone actually said that from here on end, every time that he wants to convey the idea, to convey the fact that he has no idea what exists somewhere, he would just say, what's west of Westeros? And that would be like his way of conveying the fact that, I have no idea what's there. It's the perfect ending for Arya Stark, though. This is exactly what you would expect her character to do. The exact same thing can be said about Jon Snow. What would you expect Jon to do, other than going to the real North and living the rest of his life in the real North with the free folk? I mean, seriously, what did you expect would happen? That's exactly what I would have expected to happen with Jon Snow. It would have been so unlike him to stay in King's Landing and be like the ruler of the six kingdoms. It's not in his character. I mean, he fits in the real North with the free folk. That's if they destroyed the character of Daenerys Targaryen overnight, at least when it comes to Jon, they really built his character in a way that it's clear that that's where he belongs. I mean, where else would he be other than in the real North? So I love the way that Jon Snow kind of walks with the free folk to the real North, and how that's like the last image of him that we get to see. I think it was absolutely perfect, and it was beautiful. Did you cry at any point during Game of Thrones? I actually almost cried in one particular point. You guys are going to ridicule me saying this. I'm going to get killed for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. There's a moment where Brienne of Tar sits down and writes down the story of Jaime Lannister. I didn't cry that hard, but I had like tears in my eyes, and I felt like really I'm kind of holding back the tears in a way. I don't know why, it was just so heartwarming. I don't know how else to explain it. Like the moment where Jon kills Daenerys Targaryen, it didn't feel that sad to me. Not just because she was a genocidal lunatic, but also because I never really bought the whole love story between Jon and Dany. I never felt like I really bought it. I never felt like there was really that good chemistry between them. But Brienne of Tar and Jaime Lannister, I really felt the chemistry between them. And I also very much connected to the character of Jaime Lannister, despite the fact that he views himself as a hateful person, as he calls himself when he leaves Brienne. It's clear that he isn't really hateful. I mean, he made some very serious mistakes for Cersei, but he's really not that hateful. He has a good heart. And we all know how important it was for him to be written in that book, to not be forgotten, because we all remember his father telling him all about how, you had all of this potential and you didn't do anything with it, and you're not going to be written in any book, and you're just basically going to be a nobody. And we all remember how offended he was by that. And Brienne just does him this courtesy of writing the truth about who he was. To me, it was just really emotional. It's kind of funny, but that was, to me, the most emotional part. Like, I didn't even feel like crying when Dany was killed by Jon. And I also didn't even feel like crying when Tyrion found Cersei and Jaime dead. To me, it felt almost like compulsive tears. When I saw Jon crying over Dany, and when I saw Tyrion crying over his brothers, his siblings, that is, it felt almost like compulsory sadness of some sort. They placed the violin in the background, and it was supposed to be sad, but for some reason, I wasn't that sad. Because, well, Cersei and Dany were both crazy, genocidal lunatics. But other than that, I really didn't feel the love between Tyrion and Cersei. I mean, sure, they were brothers and therefore they really loved each other, but I didn't really feel it. I didn't really connect to it. But with Jaime and Brienne, I really felt it. And it was just truly... it touched my heart, that moment, and I almost cried, really. I'm wondering, by the way, did you guys cry during the Game of Thrones? Like, ever, at any episode? If you did, please write in the comment section exactly when it happened to you. Like, in what episode and in what context. And I also think that this moment also conveyed a really positive moral kind of idea, which is that we should honor the dead by speaking the truth. Not to just remember all the bad things that they did, but also to remember the good things that they did, if they really did good things. Kind of reminds me of Speaker for the Dead, from the Ender's Game book series. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? I'll finish by saying that I really love how they lightened the mood at the end of the episode, when Tyrion sits around the table with his small council, and Bronn all of a sudden talks about the importance of brothels, and then Tyrion says, "I once brought a jackass and a honeycomb into a brothel." We actually heard Tyrion saying this joke before. He said it in season 1 and in season 5. This is what he says when he's kind of trying to be funny. So anyway, he lightens the mood with this joke yet again, and I love how they kind of finished on a positive and kind of lighthearted note anyway, with Bronn and Tyrion kind of sitting around the table and joking around a little bit. And that's a good message. The message is life goes on. And that's a good message for all of us, because there will be other shows in the future. If you're sad about the show ending, which I, much like many people, am, well, life goes on. We will get some other show some other time, which hopefully will be equally good. And we will probably whine about that too, just like we're whining about this. Thank you very much for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also click the bell button. I don't upload that many videos onto my channel because this is an animation channel. I'm hoping to upload more videos in the future, but currently I don't, which is why if you click the bell button, I'm probably not going to annoy you with that many notifications if you're worried about it, okay? So click the subscribe button, click the bell button, and hopefully I'll see you soon in the future with another video. And who knows, maybe one day we'll even become friends. Take care.